Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today we're going to be settling the debate of clean eating versus if it fits your macros. Clean eating is the philosophy held by a lot of fitness enthusiasts who say that all your foods need to be whole, single ingredient foods. You'll hear a lot of people talking about chicken, rice, and broccoli, for example. The if it fits your macros approach is something that developed more recently, where people said that as long as you hit your carbs, proteins, and fats, and your overall calories, you'll be okay for fat loss and muscle growth. And as long as you hit those targets, you can eat whatever you want. I've been getting a lot of questions on food selection, like how much junk food is okay? Today we're going to be shedding some light on the topic. Quick outline for today, we're going to start off by talking about the pros and cons of clean eating. After that, we'll talk about if it fits your macros and the advantages and disadvantages of that approach. Then I'll go on to give you some health guidelines on how to eat healthy. And lastly, we'll put everything together to give you some recommendations on how you should be eating. If you've been getting value from my content, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Okay, let's start off by talking about clean eating. Starting off with the pros, first of all, people say that with clean eating, this ensures that you meet your health guidelines. Now, I will say that the philosophy of sticking to mainly single ingredient, minimally processed foods is going to be good for health overall. And we'll be going more into my health guidelines, including micronutrients, later on. Unprocessed foods typically do include more micronutrients and a few of the things that we don't want. However, just having a super clean eating approach doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be healthy. And this is because variety is important too. So if you talk to a bodybuilder who just says that they have chicken, broccoli, and rice 6 meals a day, that isn't necessarily healthy. The next big pro clean eating is that it's more satisfying if you're in a calorie deficit or if you just have trouble sticking to your calorie targets. Minimally processed, single ingredient foods tend to be less calorie dense and more satisfying. So if your goal is weight loss, or if you just have trouble keeping a lid on your calories, then having a more clean eating approach might help you adhere. The last pro here is that if you really minimize your processed foods, things just taste better. When you don't need to contrast the taste of things like fruits and vegetables against something like candy or chips, your regular lean single ingredient foods will just taste a lot better. Now that we've talked about the pros, let's move on to talk about the cons of clean eating. First of all, a clean eating approach can be harder to sustain, just because you're under more restriction. For example, if you don't have the flexibility in your diet, you might have trouble going out to eat with your friends. Next, if you keep your diet really minimally processed and single ingredient, it might be difficult to bulk on. This doesn't apply to everyone, but some bodybuilders will find that if they're trying to bulk for an extended period of time, it's actually difficult for them to stay in a calorie surplus using minimally processed foods only. The last con here is that a clean eating approach may be more expensive or inconvenient. Certain vegetables and fruits and whole grains may be more expensive depending on where you live. And it may not always be convenient to find these foods if you're really short on time or on the go. We'll address this in the recommendations section. All right, now let's talk about the if it fits your macros approach. Here, people are saying that it doesn't matter what you eat as long as you hit your macros and your calories. And here we'll talk about the more extreme scenario, where you're really taking advantage of those food choices and say, for example, having protein shakes and Pop-Tarts for a meal. Starting off with the pros. First of all, the if it fits your macros approach is going to be more flexible. Once you have the knowledge of the macronutrient breakdown in the foods that you're eating and your overall calorie balance, you actually have a lot of flexibility in terms of your diet. This can make things more convenient and more enjoyable for a lot of people. The other pro of this approach is that it should not impact fat loss or muscle growth, as long as your macros and calories are equated. Food choices themselves don't matter that much on the grand scheme of things, as long as you're hitting your micronutrients. Okay, now let's talk about the cons of the if it fits your macros approach. First of all, with if it fits your macros, it may be more difficult to control your macros and calories. The thing is, when you start to include more processed and tasty foods, it can be difficult to keep a lid on your calorie intake, especially if your goal is fat loss or if you have trouble maintaining a lean rate of bulking. This can be a troublesome thing. And if you try to fit all of your favorite foods into a limited set of macros, you might end up being hungry all the time, or you might just cave and break your diet. Next, when people take the flexible dieting approach to the extreme, this can lead to micronutrient deficiencies or a less healthy diet. Now, your next question might be, so Bill, what do we actually need in terms of micronutrients? and what's a healthy diet? Let's talk about that next. Let's go over some general guidelines for a healthy diet. First of all, as a disclaimer, these are just some general pointers. If you have any health concerns, you should consult your doctor. But in general, people should be aiming for at least 5 servings of fruits or vegetables a day. And this is going to be really important for getting in your micronutrients as well as fiber. Higher fruit and vegetable intake has been linked with decreased mortality risk, cardiovascular risk, as well as some cancers. In terms of choosing these, I'd recommend aiming to have some leafy green vegetables, as well as fruits and vegetables of different colors. You should also have a variety of different fruits and vegetables in your diet. Aiming to have some leafy green vegetables and fruits of different colors is an easy rule of thumb to keep in mind. Now, to quickly touch on micronutrients. Vitamins and minerals are absolutely essential for your body's functioning. However, you really only run into problems when you're in a deficiency. Now, as long as you have a varied diet, including your fruits and vegetables, you should be fine in terms of macros. However, I don't think it's a bad idea to include a multivitamin just to cover your bases. Now, my next recommendation is that in terms of your grain sources, you should be aiming for at least half of your grains coming from whole grains. Examples of whole grains include brown rice, whole grain breads and cereals, and oats. This has been shown to decrease your risk of coronary heart disease as well as certain cancers. Next, you should be trying for 2 servings of fatty fish per week. And this will cover you in terms of omega-3 fatty acids. Fish has been shown to be healthy for your heart as well as a few other markers. If you don't eat fish regularly, you can consider having a fish oil supplement. Lastly, in terms of foods that you're including, make sure that you vary your food choices. Even if you're operating within these guidelines, you should be thinking about rotating your food choices on a weekly basis. Now, in terms of fats, I'd recommend that you minimize saturated and trans fats. Saturated fats are like the fats found on red meat, and trans fats might be found in things like commercially baked goods or deep fried foods. I'd recommend that you limit your red meat consumption to a max of 1 serving per day. And lastly, in terms of fats, you should try to include some nuts in your diet. Nut consumption has been linked to a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Alright, so finally let's put everything together to give you my recommendations on clean eating versus if it fits your macros. My overarching recommendation is somewhere in between, and that is the 80% rule. I recommend that you try and get at least 80% of your calories coming from whole, minimally processed, ideally single ingredient foods. And this entails using a flexible strategy operating within the health guidelines that we just talked about. Using the 80% rule will help you to cover your bases in terms of a lot of the things that we talked about earlier. And having a flexible strategy is just going to be more sustainable in the long run. Allowing yourself to have a small treat once a day or a few times a week will help you stick to your plan, and it'll be more enjoyable overall. I will note that it's very possible to operate within the guidelines we talked about on a budget and in a very convenient way. You can check out my full day of eating videos for examples on how to eat when you're really short on time. Lastly, I would recommend that you use a more clean approach for fat loss. When you're in a calorie deficit, satiety becomes a huge factor, and keeping your foods minimally processed and single ingredient will just help you to adhere to your diet plan. Using foods with a low calorie density will really help you to stay full. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and leave me a comment below. I'm really good about answering every single one of my comments, so you'll definitely hear back from me. If you want to level up your fitness knowledge, check out my affiliate link for mass in the description below. If you want to learn about supplements for bodybuilding, check out this video where I go through an up-to-date list of my favorite supplements that I actually think work for bodybuilders. If you've been getting value from my channel, make sure you subscribe and share the channel with your fitness friends so they can benefit from it too. See you next time.